Hey everyone, this is Erin from Erin's Audio Corner, and I'm here today to review the Focal Aria 906. Retail price for these speakers is $2,200 per pair, which I'll just be honest, I don't really get it. If you're wondering why this review is live, it's pretty simple. I think I've got about 15, maybe more pair of speakers to review. And I'm trying my best to get them all out the door ASAP because they belong to people. Uh, I've been trying to drop a video or two at least per week. And if I want to maintain that rate, I'm going to have to do some live videos now and again. So, what I've decided to do is to hold my live videos for speakers that to be honest, I'm just not really that excited about because the process that I do reviews in for YouTube takes a little while. Like I normally create a video, I film it, I edit it and all that stuff. Now my videos aren't great, but it takes me a good while on top of measuring the speakers and writing up the reviews for my website and then working a standard 40-hour a week job and then being, just all the typical adult stuff and then me doing this as a hobby. So basically what I'm saying is that for speakers that I'm not super excited about, I'm probably just going to do this live format type of review. And that way it allows me just to kind of get it off the table and roll on to the next thing that I'm more excited about. What am I more excited about that's coming up? I'll go ahead and tell you the KEF R3 Meta. I'm excited about those. I've got the JBL 4329s from John Sherman at the Screening Room in Colorado. He loaned those to me. I've got a set of Revel, I think it's the M126 Berylliums on loan. I've got some Aperion audio behind me. They're actually sending me 5.5-inch bookshelf speakers from their Novus line. I think they're going to be here this week. I've got Klipsch, the 7s. I've got a lot of stuff. So I got a ton of stuff. Oh, Martin Logan B10s and I think it's XT B100s. Those are coming as well. And then Acoustic Energy AE or AE100 MK2. So I've got a lot of stuff, and that's why I'm doing a live review of these speakers. And you'll kind of get to see a little bit of behind the scenes of kind of how I set up this process. And I don't know, you can let me know what you think. If you don't like it, okay, there's going to be more live reviews coming. So just don't watch the live ones, I guess, if you really don't like them. But I hope that you still appreciate it, and I hope you get something out of it. And with that said, I'm going to kick off the review. I'm going to just kind of hide myself down in the bottom corner, and I'll show you the main screen. And I'm just going to kind of roll through some stuff. If you have any questions, again, please ask. Super chats, yeah, if you want to do a super chat, that would be great. I'm more likely to see that. And I don't really want to spend like an hour doing this because if I spend an hour doing a review, people aren't going to click on the video. So I need to kind of make it as short as I possibly can. But I will try to answer your questions if you have any pertinent to this particular review. If I don't catch them, leave them in the comments. Okay. Now, that's enough of my rambling. Let's see if I can do this now. Give me 1 second. Allow me to set this up to where it's a better view. Okay, I think that will work. All right. This is the Focal Aria 906, and you can see I've actually got the pair behind me over my shoulder. I received them brand new in box. I broke them in, which for me means I listen to a lot of music over the span of like a week or two. Sometimes I'll just hit it with a whole bunch of pink noise for hours at a time at reasonable levels, because the last thing I want to do is burn a voice coil in a tweeter or a midwoofer. After I did all of that, then I put them on my clip-on near-field scanner. I tested them out. I got the data. I didn't look at it yet, except just to sanity check it. And then I brought them back into my listening space, and I listened to them, and I took notes on my phone, which is somewhere out of the way right now, so I won't be distracted by it. And then I typed up a couple little notes into PowerPoint. I dropped in the images, and I like to do that because then I don't see the data beforehand, and I can try to look at my notes and then correlate the measurements with what I heard. I feel like that provides the best value to all of you, because if I just say, here's the data, some people may not understand it. And there's frankly, it's kind of fun for me. I'm a bit of a nerd. It's fun for me to go through and look at the data and say, oh, that matches this particular frequency band that I was having issues with, or I like that particular area, and this looks like what I would expect in the data. So it's like a hunt almost in a way, and that's what really excites me about this hobby, this passion of mine. It allows me to provide you all with actual objective data that provides accountability, and it makes it fun to try to go and correlate the results with what I heard. And I hope you all, can see the excitement because, whatever. I'm a big nerd. What can I say? So this is a picture of the speakers. Like I said, they retail for 22 or 2,300 bucks per pair. I have some of their specs, right here. Yeah, $2,200 per pair. You can see in the upper right corner area, I've got a comment that says nice mid-range, but piercing high sibilance and recessed upper mid-range. So that's basically my takeaway. You can see it's a two-way bass reflex, so vented enclosure, 6.5-inch midwoofer, 1-inch tweeter, frequency response spec, low frequency spec, 89 dB sensitivity spec from them. They rated as minimum impedance of 4.6 ohm with a nominal impedance of 8 ohm. Blah 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 blah. These are their specs, right? I like to provide their specs just so you kind of know what you're getting, namely just the basic design. It's a two-way design. And here's the dimensions for it. And the weight is approximately 19 pounds or 8.5 kilograms for those of you who are not in the United States. Okay, so pros. Not really many of them, to be honest with you. I just say very nice mid-range, no audible resonances in the mid-range. And there's a nice aesthetic of black leather and a gloss sides. So then we'll skip ahead and look at the cons, which unfortunately there's a lot of them. So bear with me. And these are just note form for me. They're not really for anybody to see. It's nothing that I would submit to some sort of AES convention or anything, but you get to see the behind the details or behind the scenes stuff. So I say I would have preferred, and it's the key word, I would have preferred about a dB more in the mid-range. And when I say that, I'm talking about approximately 150 hertz to 300 hertz. That's where I'm talking about. And why do I say that? Well, I just wanted a little bit more meat in that mid-range area. But when I look at the data, I don't see anything that's lacking there. So that could just be preference. And I also noted that it could have been relative to the high frequency because the high frequency is boosted a good bit. Then I say bass is somewhat weak with a roll-off of in-room around 50 hertz, anechoic at about 60 hertz, missing strong punch and kick bass. Okay, so I'm gonna give my secret away here. I don't have like a Rolodex of subjective terminology that I use that I just go and pull from to make me sound like I'm a super audiophile. I don't do that, guys. It's pretty simple for me. The bass, the mids, the highs. And I'm listening for things broken out in those three categories. And when I hear something I don't like, I usually have a pretty good idea of what frequency range is in just because of my experience with tuning different sound systems and things like that, listening to a lot of the same music over and over, understanding where certain sounds are in the frequency response spectrum of things. For example, if something's kind of nasally, it may have like too much in the 800 to 1 kilohertz range. If something sounds way too chesty, it's probably going to be a resonance in the 100 to 300 hertz region, depending on if it's a male vocal or a female vocal, if it's a deeper vocal or a more heightened vocal, those kind of things. So I basically trained myself over years of actually sitting in sound systems with a DSP and equalizing them on the fly, setting crossovers and things like that with DSP. So that's how I've gotten to where I got to. And the things that I look for with bass, does it have a good kick bass? Does it have a good 50 to 60 hertz fundamental? And if it doesn't, if it sounds like that kick bass is missing in certain tracks that I'm used to, then I know that most likely that speaker just doesn't play that frequency. And it's not the room, it's probably that speaker because I'm used to other speakers in that room with that music. So not much punch in the kick bass. I noted that it's very bright, high frequency. And then I said note, not detailed. So let me hide this screen for 1 second here, because I want to make this point. There's been a lot of speakers that I'm testing or have tested somewhat recently that have boosted high frequency. After I do my reviews, usually I'll go back to see what other people have said, or I'll go look for other data from other people to see, how well did my review line up? It's kind of a check for myself. And what I'm consistently seeing is that there are a lot of reviewers who consider detail as basically just elevated treble. And I really hope that people understand that, not even talking subjectively, detail is not boosted high frequency. And if you're thinking that, well, maybe it is for somebody with hearing loss, well, they hear that way every day, meaning that their reference is what they hear sounds in every day. That there's boosted high frequency, it's boosted high frequency. It's not detail. It stands out to them, and maybe they like it because they're not used to it. But I can speak from experience and tell you that honestly, majority of the time that you have a speaker with elevated treble and somebody calls it detailed is because they've only listened to that speaker for about 30 minutes to an hour. I've got a lot of experience with subjective listening, and that's my experience. So speaking subjectively tied with objectively, my notes on detail is that generally if somebody says it's detailed, it just means it's bright. And after a few hours or a few weeks of owning that speaker, you're probably going to get tired of it. I'm not saying everybody. And if you're somebody out there who disagrees with me, that's fine. But I'm just speaking on my personal experience and what I see in the data from various speakers and various systems, not even just anechoic data, but measuring in-room response. Sibilant, every single track I listened to was sibilant, meaning that typically it's about 4 to 8 kilohertz is where sibilant stands out in music. It can go as high as 10K, and I think sibilants can go down to 3K, but for the most part, sibilants is 4 to 8 kilohertz. And if you don't know what sibilance is, it's just that S sound. And if that S sound sounds like it's hanging on too long, then that's sibilance. The range of frequencies is just how low is that sibilance. If it could be more of like a dull sibilance, and I'm giving a wild example here of something like that might be more like a dull sibilance, where might be like a sharper sibilance. So you may be talking like 3K versus 10K or something like that. I'm again just kind of go with the example that I'm giving. It's not perfect, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying there. In regards to sibilance, it's often the case that turning a speaker off axis, meaning completely away from you. Let me back up a little bit. I was primarily listening to these speakers on axis with them aimed toward my head. You can turn speakers off axis, aim them away from you, and get rid of that sibilance. But with these particular speakers, that didn't help a lick. And actually turning them 30 degrees off axis, they were still just as sibilant as they are, relatively speaking at least, on axis. Particularly like the 8K area was just way too much. It's just way too overemphasized. And I really did not like that. I noted that there was a dip in the upper mid-range, lower treble, and that sounds tended to sound recessed. And, I don't really have a way on the fly to give you an example of what I mean by that. But it, for a lack of better words, it made music sound it was lost in the mix. Like some sounds were further back in the sound stage. And there's actually a trick to this, okay? So if you take 2.5 kilohertz or 5 kilohertz and you drop those frequencies down, you can actually pseudo simulate depth of the soundstage. It's not right. And if you are keen for listening for things like this, then you'll understand that you've basically just been duped, But that same thing shows up in frequency response anomalies. And when you have a dip in that upper mid-range, lower treble region, typically around like 2 to 4 kilohertz, things can sound recessed. They can sound like there's a loss in detail. There's a few different adjectives you can use to describe that, but that's what I'm describing. So sometimes mixes may sound forward. This is not the case with this particular speaker. A lot of mixes, a lot of songs sounded recessed. I noted that there was very high distortion and compression at the highest output. Now, when I'm reviewing bookshelf speakers or speakers of moderate size, I normally don't ding them too hard on high distortion, high compression, because, it's not like these are tower speakers, or not like bookshelf speakers or tower speakers with 8-inch mid bass where you expect them to play really loud and get really low. There's obviously some limits there, but I still noted that because that is a concern overall, and you definitely want to use a subwoofer with the speaker if for no other reason than it's getting loud. It's not going to get low in the bass. Like I said, there's not a lot of kick bass, which means below about 50 hertz in room, don't expect much at all out of these speakers. But if you also want to listen loudly, you are still going to need a subwoofer. Okay, so let me throw this data back up here. Okay, data. Hey, this is the impedance. And do I have anything after that? I do not. Okay. Overall impedance, let's see here. Minimum impedance, 4.8 ohm. And I would say, an AVR might be able to drive this, but most speakers that I'm testing that are around the 4 ohm region, I still say if you can get a separate amplifier that is 4 ohm capable, especially if you're planning on listening loud. If any of you own these speakers and you have AVRs powering them, let me know in the chat or in the comments below. Okay, we'll keep going. Let's see here. The frequency response, linearity, and the sensitivity. Average sensitivity is 86.5 decibels at 2.83 volts 1 meter. And the linearity is not really that good. It's within about plus or minus 3 dB, which is not terrible. Certainly seen worse. But at $2,200 per pair, this speaker should not have these kind of variations in them. And then you're going up pretty dang high. It's about plus 6 dB or so at 20 kilohertz. So there's, I don't know, probably some kind of breakup in the tweeter that's causing this peaking going on. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't really hear that. I think I didn't hear that because I was so keyed in on hearing the recession in this upper mid-range, lower treble area. F3, 61 hertz, F10, 44 hertz. This is anechoic, which means, generally speaking, what I see is you can add or subtract, I guess, about 10 hertz from these numbers when you put a speaker in a room. It's not always that way, but just generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, I would say in a room, you're going to get down to about 50 hertz as your F3, and then it's going to roll off pretty precipitously. After that, I don't even know how I meant to say that word without fumbling it. But anyway, let's see. I highlighted the mid-range area that I had an issue with, where it sounded like it was recessed in the mid-range. And here is the CEA 2034 data. Same thing, the on-axis response, the listening window response. It's the exact same thing that you just saw in this chart. Okay, but now I've also added some additional information that's really useful to understand what the speaker's doing all the way around it. And particularly, I want to look at the early reflections directivity indices, which gives us an idea of how EQable is this speaker. Anywhere there's a deviation from a line, basically, means that you're not going to be able to EQ in that particular area. So, for example, if I were to draw an imaginary line running through here from 100 hertz all the way to 1 kilohertz, 1 kilohertz, I'd say reasonably you could equalize the speaker. But around 1.2 to 1.5, there's some oddity going on there. Going to be harder to equalize that speaker. Flatline through 2 to 3 kilohertz, roughly, equalizable area. And then this broad dip through here means it's going to be harder to equalize. Now, I want to make something clear. When I talk about equalization, you can always equalize the speaker. You can do whatever you want to it. The thing is that you want whatever is being radiated directly on axis or in the measurement reference plane to be the same thing that hits all the sidewalls, floor, of the ceiling, ideally, because all that reflected sound is going to be roughly the same in timbre as what you hear directly. And when there's a deviation from that, that means that you're going to notice inconsistencies in the sound and things aren't going to quite jive as well, basically. So if you want to equalize this speaker and have the same sounds, you want all of this blue line down here to be roughly linear. I make a distinction between the same sounds because think about it like this. If you equalize, let me start over. You cannot separate on-axis sound, so the direct sound, versus the reflected sound. If you have measurements of direct sound and you want to tweak things to make this response flat, this on-axis response flat, you're also doing the same things to all the other sounds that are going all around that speaker that's radiating all the way to the side of it, behind it, up straight above it, everywhere. It's all being affected the exact same way. So that's why you want your reflections to mimic the on-axis response. And in this case, there's certain areas where you just don't have that. So you're not going to have the luxury of being able to equalize the speaker in the best manner. Okay. I highlighted all this stuff again. let's see, estimated in-room response. It's a good idea to give you what it probably is going to sound like in terms of tonality, not sound stage, not anything like that, because that's a separate thing. But in terms of just the overall tonality, what's the speaker profile? What's it probably going to sound like? Well, from this, we can see that it's not quite linear. And there's a little bit of a dip again to this mid range, is what I heard. And then there's this peaking in the upper, well, not upper, but the tweeter region, I guess, if you want to call it that, this 8 kilohertz area. But let's draw a trend line through it to get a better idea, because it makes it a little bit easier to see. Okay, so now we got a trend line going through. We can see, yes, there's a recession in this upper mid range. And then here's this peaking between about, I think that's about, what is this, 5 hertz is around here. So it's harder for me to see this, to be honest with you guys. But this right here explains that sibilance that I was hearing. Now, some speakers are certainly worse, and maybe I don't hear the sibilance as much. These things are all relative, right? And the fact that you have this peaking right here, an abrupt change in sibilance from this dip through this mid-range right here, these two back-to-back make this peaking sound more problematic, and or it makes this recess sound more problematic. If you had just one of these, for example, if this right here, this estimated interim response was flatter through this particular region, or trend line followed more reasonably through this particular region, then the peaking and the sibilance wouldn't be as bad. But the combo punch of this one right after the other made the sibilance so much worse for me. Going on. The horizontal polar pattern, I would say radiation pattern is about plus or minus 60 degrees on this speaker. You know, you got a lot for this dip in the upper mid-range area through here. So there's some less red through this particular area. So overall, about plus or minus 60 degrees in width. And let's see, narrowing in 1 to 4 kilohertz, widening above 5 kilohertz. So this particular area, go back to that example I gave you earlier when I was talking about if you want to equalize one sound, you're equalizing all of them. If you want to equalize the direct sound, you're equalizing the reflected sound, which means if you wanted to knock down this 5 kilohertz area, then you'd also be knocking down these guys. But on axis, the 5 kilohertz area wasn't really a problem. It was relatively smooth. So why would you want to equalize something that's relatively smooth? Well, now you see you've got this over here. So you're thinking, oh, in the room, I'm going to equalize 5 kilohertz. Well, remember in the CEA 2034 data, there was some oddity going on there. It was no longer linear. So you really can't equalize that area without basically undoing the flatness in the 5 kilohertz area. So it's just like, there's not a good trade-off there. And it makes it tougher to get the sound that you want out of that speaker in that particular region. Okay, so vertical response. I'm drawing these two arrows, and I'm basically saying that at 0 degrees, that's your tweeter line. That's where your reference line is. And if you go above the tweeter line or you go below the tweeter line, you're going to have a hole in the response, and the timbre is going to sound very different. It's not an issue for people who are listening in stereo, but if you have multiple seats, or if you feel like, you know, one day you're going to grow 6 inches and the next day you're going to shrink 7 inches, you're not going to hear the same thing. So just make sure that you're listening at 0 degrees on axis. It's what I recommend. Distortion to 86 dB, 3% distortion is not hit until you're around 50 hertz. So not a problem there, at least in my opinion. Use a subwoofer, obviously. But at 96 dB, at 1 meter, which at, let's say, about 10 to 12 feet for a pair in a room, 96 dB is going to be around 90 dB, give or take. Which is loud, yeah, but you remember, you're talking about trying to maintain peaks of output. We're not talking about constant listening at 96 dB. You want peaks of output to be able to hit a certain level. So at 96 dB at 1 meter, you've exceeded the distortion threshold and the lower male vocal region, and certainly in the low bass area. So again, use a subwoofer and you will help alleviate some of these issues. Now we've got multi-tone distortion, which is a really good way of saying, like, okay, cool, you've done these sweeps with a sine wave. Cool, you use a test tone. None of that matters to me. But with multi-tone distortion, which is what I'm showing here, it's simulating real music via pink noise. But think about it. Pink noise is just a bunch of sine waves. Real music is really just a bunch of sounds, tones, square waves, whatever. They're all fundamentally a sine wave. So it's all tones. So it's 32 tones played across this speaker's bandwidth all at the same time. And I vary the level from 70 decibels to 96 decibels. 70 decibels, and then that's about 78, 86, and 90. That's where we're at. So at the highest output level at 1 meter of 90 dBs, 90 dB, you've exceeded what I consider my personal threshold. And I've got a whole video on multi-tone distortion. I'll try to remember to link it, but if not, just search it. 3% distortion, which is equivalent to negative 330 dB down, is audible. I mean, it varies with music, but in my experience, that's why I've drawn this personal threshold. That's when you run into audible issues, and anything above that to me is really not acceptable. And what it sounds like is just a grainy sound. Again, go watch that video. It's like 30 minutes long, and it really is good. It gives you multiple examples on what multi-tone distortion sounds like, and you can actually hear it for yourself. Okay, so multi-tone distortion's not that great at the highest output levels. What happens if you use a subwoofer, though? Does it help? If I use a high pass filter of essentially 80 to 100 hertz somewhere, does that help knock down some of that mid-range distortion? It does, right? Let's go back and forth. This was full range, and this is not full range. So using a subwoofer is going to help knock down that mid-range distortion. Okay, now we're going to look at compression. If you're used to seeing compression, you already know this is a problem. If you're not, then just imagine that you want all of these color lines to be stacked on top of each other at 0 dB. And any deviation toward the negative down here is compression. That means that speaker is no longer being able to play the level that I want it to play. And the level that I want it to play is marked by the different colors here. Basically, this speaker suffers severe compression below about 80 hertz. So you can see you're losing a lot of bass output, even at 96 decibels at 1 meter. And then if you try to go beyond that, you've asked way too much of the speaker. It's not going to be able to do it. So this speaker is relatively output limited. It's a bookshelf speaker, so you've got to weigh that. You've got to consider that. You've got to consider you're probably going to use a subwoofer. But really, what this compression data and what the distortion data tell me and should relay to you is that this speaker is just not going to play that loud. It's just not. That there's going to be limitations to it, and the bass is going to just give up. You're just not going to play that loud. You're going to have mid-range distortion. So really keep an eye on the volume, or at least consider the volume levels that you want to listen to when you're buying and using this speaker. And significant bass compression at highest output. Okay, so alternatives. Now, I admit, I kind of threw this one in last minute because some of you had asked me to provide alternatives. So at about $2,200 per pair, these are the ones that I kind of came up with off the top. Now, I didn't go through and search for every speaker I've ever reviewed. I didn't search for everybody else's speaker that's manufactured. I just thought of some kind of off the top and thought, these are good speakers in this price class, okay? The KEF R3 Meta, my review is coming, but I'm just going to go ahead and say, based off the R3, I'm going to put the R3 Meta in there. The Revel M106 is another good speaker. Wharfdale Linton is, honestly, I think it's one of my favorite speakers, regardless of price, and that's a really great speaker. So Philharmonic BMR V2. I put this one in there because it's different. It's a DIY type design by Dennis Murphy. It's a really cool speaker. Radiation patterns, I think, too wide for my likes, but it's one worth considering. JBL HDI 1600. I've not reviewed that one, but I've seen the data on it. I've heard them in person, a couple different places. I'd have no problem recommending that speaker as well. Okay. And then the last thing that I'll just mention, if you want to support, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Erin's Audio Corner. You can do $1. You can do whatever you want, but it definitely helps me, and I certainly appreciate it. I have donations set up via PayPal. It's in the description below. And then I use affiliate links, generic affiliate links. I used to use specific affiliate links, but I've gotten away from doing that. So if you want to buy this speaker or you want to buy a bar of soap, it doesn't matter. Just click on one of the generic affiliate links below to take you to the appropriate place, Amazon, AudioFice, Crutchfield, whatever. Any of those methods help me, and it really doesn't matter what you buy. Just go through the generic affiliate link, and that helps me out, okay? So that's enough for me, saying, here's how you support me. I hope you appreciate all this, and now I'm going to flip through these comments real fast. I'm just going to look, honestly, guys, I'm just going to look for the, if anybody's got any, let's see here. Okay, so Chris, super chat. Thank you for the super chat, Chris. I appreciate that. Was it EQable? Hopefully, I answered your question. Unfortunately, some of the problem areas that I have with the speaker are not EQable, and a couple of them are. The bass being one that you don't want to mess with EQ unless you're listening at like low levels. You really don't want to mess with equalization on the bass because then you're dumping a lot extra power into a speaker that really just can't handle that kind of excursion. So, but I appreciate you asking, and I appreciate the super chat. Let's see here. Alex D, does the impedance really look that rough below 100 hertz? That looks like resonant central. So here's the thing: you can sweep the impedance at different levels, and you can get different results. That's why I make sure to note what the level is that I'm sweeping at. So I'm trying to stay consistent. I could sweep at a different level. I could take 132 averages. I could smooth it down to 1/3 octave smoothing. I could do whatever I needed to do to make that look better, but I don't. And I 100% agree with you. It looks really funky, but those are the results. Both of them measured that way. Not the exact same, but both of them measured really similarly. Let's see here. Oh, wow, that's a huge thank you very much for this super chat. 1999, Joshua. Man, I'm so glad you were back. I know you went through a season. You were in my prayers on many occasions. Thank you for your dedication to give us good review. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the community certainly being here and offering me support. And let me hide all this stuff. Yeah, I appreciate the community. I had a lot of people, other reviewers who I'd never even talked to, reach out to me. So that was really cool. And I had a lot of, viewers like yourself offer me, words of encouragement. So that was really awesome too. And I 100% appreciate all that. It really is cool how the community can come together. I've seen things get really negative, and I've been part of that. I've really tried to stay out of the murkiness the best I possibly can. And unfortunately, I'm human. Sometimes I dive deep into that, and I'm like, why'd I do that? But I think if we can just try to keep things, on an up and up, and just keep it about the data and keep it about understanding and learning and trying to make better purchase decisions, which is what I'm ultimately here for, is just to help people understand what they're buying and what they're hearing so they can have better informed decisions, then that's really all I need to do. So, but yeah, dude, I appreciate that a lot. Oh, EC, $10 super chat. Thank you. Glad you're back and making videos. Thank you, dude. I mean, that's awesome, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, you guys are awesome. I'm expecting like questions about the speaker, but I certainly appreciate the kind words. Let's see here. Okay. All right. I noticed a couple comments in here. Somebody said something about Ascend acoustics. I'm sorry, I just lost it in the fray. Chris said something about Ascend acoustics. I talked to Dave about measuring some of the speakers, and I think we're working on something maybe in the next few weeks or a couple months. So be on the lookout for that. I'll also throw out too that if anybody is near the North Carolina area, Audio Advice is having their Audio Advice live. I think it's the weekend of August 5th. I don't know the exact dates, but maybe it's like August 3rd, but it's that weekend. It's like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Regardless of when it is, if you go to their website, you'll find it. I plan on being there, and if any of you are from that particular area, come on out. I don't know how much it costs, but come on out, join, look for me, let me know, send me a message or something, and let me know if you're going to be there, and I'll do my best to meet up with you, because it's cool doing these reviews, but seeing people in person is way better than just talking to a screen like I'm doing right now. This gentleman is from Winston-Salem. Yeah, so the show is actually going to be in Raleigh, which I've often pronounced as Raleigh, and like whatever. I get it so wrong. I'll grab this one real fast. Brian, hey Brian, what's up, dude? Erin, I'm curious if the differences you're hearing are due to the on-axis frequency response or in-room power response. Certainly a combination. Usually, I kind of touched on this a minute ago, but maybe I didn't do a good job of tying it together. Usually, if I listen to a speaker on axis and I see stuff in the frequency response, I'm like, okay, like I'm hearing more of the direct sound in this particular case than if I turn it off axis and I no longer hear that issue. Does that make sense? But in this particular case, with these particular speakers, even towing them out 30 degrees, I still heard that sibilance and it was bright. And I had a second opinion. You know, I'm not going to do that whole like audiophile thing where I asked my wife and she was in the kitchen 3 doors down and she said that she could hear the clarity. All these cables are better. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm just saying that I asked somebody else, like, what do you think? And they said, yeah, they sound kind of bright. And I was like, yeah. I thought so too. So that's anecdotal, but turning the speakers to off axis didn't alleviate the issue. So I think in this case, it really is the sound power, if you want to call it that. I tend to default to early reflections. But yeah, certainly the sound power is playing a role here, and not so much the on axis anechoic, but the overall room and speaker. Well, let me back that up. The overall speaker response off axis and on axis, because we know that what is sent out into the sides is reflected back. And unfortunately, some of those bad things are also reflected back in this particular speaker design. Are those the ones that Chana has? I don't know. I hope not. I'm about to tell him he needs to get his ears fixed. Kidding. I'm gonna run back through this real fast to see if I missed anybody. And if I did not, I'm probably gonna go ahead and bail out because I am super tired and I really got to get some sleep. Is this a heavy bookshelf speaker? I wouldn't say it is, but hang on. I mean, no. Nah, it's not a heavy bookshelf speaker, but you can see a little bit more closely now. So hopefully, hey, look, there I am. Okay. I think that's going to be it for me. If you guys have any further questions, please ask them in the comments below. And I will see you on the next one. Let me know if y'all like the live stuff. I mean, I'm probably still going to do it anyway, but you know, if it's just like, ugh, then I won't bother with it. But honestly, this saves me so much time. All of this time would have been spent editing and filming and removing my uhs and my ums. And I realize that I do a lot of those when I watch my videos back. So I will talk to you all later. I really hope you all have a good night and take care. Peace.